There's a lot of moving parts right now in college football. A lot. And they all started years and years ago, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But everyone is pushing forward to the same thing. The SEC moving to a 9-game conference, a scheduling agreement between the Big Ten and the SEC, an expanded playoff where the Big Ten and the SEC have 4 automatic bids, and a college football playoff that has either 14 or 16 games in it. Stick with me, Dean Legge from Dawg Post. Let me try to get you to an explanation of all of those things. Now look, this is going to be an intricate, nuanced video. All of this reporting is coming from Ross Sillinger over at Yahoo. He's done a great job over the years of explaining all of these things with his very good reporting. I'm going to add reporting where I can. I've done a lot of reporting on television and as it relates to money in these conferences. But what's happening right now is that the current status in the college football playoff and in college football that began at the start of the college football playoff era, which, you know, that we got the college football playoff era, this thing, we got it because Alabama beat LSU in the national championship game in 2011 in the BCS, even though Alabama didn't even win their division, okay? That wrangled and rolled everybody in college football. And so from that point forward, we moved to a 14 playoff. Almost always, not always, almost always it was 4 conference champions. Now what's happening is the Big Ten, the SEC have said, listen, we're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to sit around and watch Arizona State and Boise State get buys when our teams who are better than them are playing an extra game. We're not doing that anymore. That's A. B, we're going to get 4 automatic bids each. Talking about the SEC and the Big Ten. We're not playing this game. People are watching these games because of us. It has nothing to do with y'all. You know, no offense, Notre Dame, ACC, Big 12. Y'all don't matter like we do. We're taking this thing over. Basically, from what Ross reported, and I have no doubt about this being true, the SEC and the Big Ten said, hey, look, if you don't capitulate to our terms, we're taking our ball, we're creating our own national championship. And Disney probably said to the ACC, fall in line. And they probably said to the Big 12, hey, we only have half your contract, but you need to get in line here. And so we're about to see them all get in line. They can throw their hands up all they want. They can act like they're a big deal. They're not. It's the Big Ten and the SEC show. Now, let's talk about the ramifications of this moving forward. In 2026, the 25 season, but the 26 playoff, so this next year that we're going to see, nothing's going to change. The ACC, the Pac-12, and the group of 5 teams, they're not going to agree to changes for this current year. The SEC and the Big Ten are going to have to get through this 2-year bump. I mean, the Big Ten just won the national championship, so you know it's not the end of the world for them. But they want to get more teams in. You know, the SEC wants to get Lane Kiffin in for once, or South Carolina, or whoever. I mean, if you're South Carolina and you beat Clemson on the road, and you go and watch them play in the college football playoff, you got to be wondering, well, wait a second, why aren't we in the college football playoff? Well, there's answers to that question, but I don't want to go through all that. But the point is, from here on out, Alabama, Ole Miss, those teams that were left out last year or this current year, they're not going to be left out in the future. So the college football playoff is about to look very different. And so is the SEC schedule. Let me talk about that right now. So in order for all of these things to happen, the SEC is probably going to have to do some adjustment, which means Disney's probably going to have to do some adjustments too. For years, we've talked about this. The SEC had an 8-game schedule. It balanced up with division play. We're no longer in division play. So what's going to happen is what's likely to happen, okay? And Ross is reporting this. I mean, there's just no way this isn't accurate. The SEC is almost certainly going to go to a 9-game conference schedule in 2026. Excuse me. The college football playoff being named after the year of the competitive year it can be a little bit. But this is the reason why the SEC did exactly what they're doing. They did a 2-year trial run of games. All right. From that point forward, these, you know, almost certainly in 2026, you're going to see a 9-game SEC schedule. Why? Okay, the overarching reason is because it's more money. You can go to Disney. I can report there's what's a so-called look-in window. This is when the schools and the schools and Disney get to look at things together, and they say, okay, we'd like to do this. Well, we'd like to do this, and they will figure out how to get to a 9-game. Now, stick with me as well here. When you get to a 9-game, that means there's going to have to be some change in the scheduling format and so forth. But this almost certainly saves games, almost certainly, not certainly. This almost certainly saves games like Georgia, Auburn, Tennessee, Alabama, games like that are not, there's sort of the tertiary rivalries, not the primary rivalry like Georgia, Florida, or Auburn, Alabama, and not, Georgia can't play everybody in the SEC. I know it seems like they did last year. They can't play everybody. And if Texas and say Texas A&M or Texas and Arkansas, if that game's really important, a 9-game gives you the ability to save that game. You have more of those games. You have fewer Vanderbilt, Missouris, and everybody moves on. You get paid more money. Ross is saying about $5 million a year. I don't know. I don't know if that's accurate or not. I don't know if that's the value, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But the kicker here is that the Big Ten and the SEC, and I'm not quite sure how this is supposed to work, but the SEC and the Big Ten could start their own side deal worth millions and millions of dollars a year. So why is everybody really worried about money? I talk about that in a video later this week. Make sure you're tuning in. Yes, it's about money and greed, if you want to call it that. But the issue really is each school is going to have to start paying about $20 million per year to their student athletes. That's a huge hit to the budget, okay? So if the SEC and the Big Ten were to agree to a 1-game a year, shoot off. So for instance, Kentucky, Indiana, Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Texas. Guess who's playing this year? Ohio State and Texas are opening the season with one another. Those are the type of games that could happen every single season. Georgia, Wisconsin, Auburn, Penn State. We saw that recently. UCLA. Georgia, UCLA was just canceled. So these games have sort of been in the ether for a while. They're just getting canceled because honestly, they're getting canceled because no one knows what's next. So that's a lot of what's going on. But because you have 4 automatic bids in the future, in theory, it doesn't really matter if you play, go to Wisconsin and lose a game if you're LSU, or if you are Georgia and you host, they'll never make it Minnesota, but if Georgia were to host USC, okay, and then they go out to Los Angeles a year later to play UCLA, you get the point. Whoever loses that game, it's not going to matter that much. Georgia, Alabama, it's not going to matter that much. It doesn't take away from the passion of that game in that moment because you would have never seen USC, Georgia. But it gives people something to look forward to at the start of the season. Big Ten has a really bad start to the season schedule. And because the Pac-12 doesn't exist anymore, a lot of the games they played, it's gotten bad. So you get all that, and you start looking at a 14-team playoff. My guess, this is purely speculative, is that they'll go to 14 and not 16. They'll add 2 teams. They'll sort of ice out Notre Dame, who is still being treated special. But, look, the thing about Notre Dame is this. At some stage, you can see the dominoes lining up. They're going to have to figure out, do they want to go to the Big Ten? Do they want to go to the SEC? The right of first refusal in all of this is the ACC for Notre Dame. But they do get a carve out, but there's going to come a time where Notre Dame realizes, okay, we've had a great run of 100 plus years of being an independent. It's really in our best interest from here on out not to be an independent. But we're not at that point yet, and we'll just see what happens there. That will probably happen when the ACC falls apart. When that happens and North Carolina and Notre Dame are out there, that's when you're going to see some change. So let me get back to the point here. You're going to see a lot of change in these next 6 months that is going to come from reporting from guys like Ross and sort of real national reporters. And that's going to show you what the future will be like. The SEC will almost certainly go to a 9-game schedule in 2026. The question is, will they add the Big Ten marriage in that or not? The Big Ten's television contract is up at the end of this decade, okay? So that means that the Big Ten will have some flexibility at that point. The SEC's contract is not up until like 2030, in the middle 2030s, and the ACC's is not up until the end of the 2030s, okay? So the Big 12, I think they short pitted as well there, and I think there's pretty soon as well. So, but there's no question that I don't mean it disrespectfully to anyone who's watching the league office. I know occasionally people from the SEC watch these. I don't mean this disrespectfully towards Greg Sankey. I mean it in I don't know how else to say it, but the power grab that the Big Ten and the SEC, almost certainly led by Greg Sankey, took here was the right and appropriate move. I mean, look, I'm not going to get up here and act like Florida State and Clemson are the same thing as Georgia and Texas. They're not. They're not. You want to put this on TigerNet or whatever, you can do that. You know it. I know it. It's not the same. It's not the same as Alabama. It's not the same as LSU. That's the whole point, and that's why Florida State and Clemson and the Miamis of the world are in actual trouble here. The Big Ten and the SEC are moving forward in a very big way. I do want to say this. I can't remember when it was. It was when Kevin Warren was in the Big Ten as their commissioner. I had an SEC administrator say to me at one point at that time that he really wished that Sankey and Kevin Warren, could get together and sort of move forward in a way. Well, we're seeing that now, and we're seeing the reshaping of college football in a way that the power is surrounding the SEC and the Big Ten. There will come a time when these two form their alliance in a formal way. I don't know when that will be. I don't know that might be at the conclusion of the SEC's contract. My suspicion is that will be at the conclusion of the SEC's contract in the 2030s, so about 10 years from now. But until that happens, these two will be frenemies that are dictating the future. It reminds me of the end of World War II, where the Soviets and the Americans essentially were carving up the rest of the world. I don't know if there will be a Cold War. There's a Cold War right now, but it seems to be thawing in a major way. But I want to say that in 2026, you should prepare for Georgia to either go to or host a game against a Big Ten school. It is possible it could happen in 2026. That may be a little early. We'll see. But, Georgia has already got a pretty ambitious future schedule. But in 2026, you should certainly plan for Georgia being in the playoff. I mean, it's 4 teams. The automatic bid has never been there for the SEC until this past season, and Georgia won it. So I think on the whole, this is a good thing for college football. But some people are going to get left behind. And I think my personal view is that one reason why things have settled down with Florida State and Clemson's lawsuits, things have settled down with sort of the bickering with the Big Ten and the SEC, is that everybody knows where this is going, and it's being reported now. Reported heavily by Ross over at Yahoo. He's doing a great job. But I'm just going to tell you, behind the scenes, people have wanted this to settle down for a little bit of time. And, I think the SEC getting into a 9-game, they had to have Disney come along board for that. And that wasn't going to happen until there was a playoff expansion. You're about to see a playoff expansion. I can tell you, they were not against doing an expansion, but they weren't going to give something and get nothing. And then you have, so things are lining up. How quick this will happen is a good question. Hey, thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next video.